In 2010, BP oil rig Deepwater Horizon exploded. Most believe that this explosion was due to a core malfunction, but what if something more sinister happened? Follow me down the rabbit hole to find out what. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Dani, and today we are talking about the Deepwater Horizon oil rig explosion. I didn't know there were conspiracy theories behind this until I started looking into it. This wasn't a suggestion. I just was looking for a new conspiracy theory for you guys, and here we are. If you all remember, I remember it as like the BP oil spill. It's called Deepwater Horizon. There's a great movie. If you haven't seen the movie, go watch it. On April 20th, 2010, in the Gulf of Mexico, about 41 miles off the coast of Louisiana, Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded. This caused the largest oil spill in our history. The rig sunk just like 2 days later so it exploded on April 20th, and then on the 22nd, it officially sank. The oil rig was owned by BP, or it wasn't owned by BP. It was in use by BP. So I guess they must have had a lease on it. So just a little bit extra information. The oil well that the rig was actually getting its oil from was located 4,993 feet, or 1,522 meters below the surface, and extended approximately 18,000 feet into the rock. So there's a lot of oil under there, which obviously there's a lot of oil offshore drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, because there's so much oil under the Gulf of Mexico. So how did the rig explode? Well, a surge of natural gas blasted through there's this concrete core, and the surge of natural gas blasted through that core. That core had recently been installed. The core was installed in order to seal the well for later use. And it was actually installed by a company called Halliburton. And they're going to be part of the conspiracy theory later, but I just want you to know that Halliburton actually installed this concrete core that was supposed to seal the well. And once the natural gas was released, it traveled up the riser to the platform, and then on the platform is where the gas ignited, and that it killed 11 workers and injured 17 others. Like I said earlier, the rig capsized on the 22nd, causing the riser to rupture. And this is where the drilling mud was injected in order to counteract the upward pressure of oil and natural gas. So without the opposing force, oil just began to leak everywhere into the Gulf of Mexico. At first, BP estimated that about 1,000 barrels per day was being released into the Gulf. But U.S. officials have said that they think at the peak of the spill, about 60,000 barrels per day was being released. So they were trying to downplay it as much as possible. It's really not that much, only 1,000. No, it was definitely not 1,000 barrels per day. It was way, way, way more than that. BP did try to activate the rig's blowout preventer, which is also called a BOP, which is basically a failsafe in case something like this does occur, because they have to have emergency procedures, and this was their emergency procedure. However, it didn't work because there was a malfunction with the device. A report that was released later said that the BOP failed because the pipe carrying the oil had bent under the pressure of the rising gas and oil. So the BOP basically clamps the pipe to stop it, clamps it off, but the pipe had bent, so the BOP, the blowout preventer, couldn't actually do its job. So it wouldn't have malfunctioned except for all the other malfunctions that worked out exactly perfectly. Basically, it would have done its job, but it didn't have the opportunity to. So that wasn't really on BP. I'm trying to give them a little bit of grace here. Many efforts were made to stop the spill, obviously, because we don't want oil in the Gulf of Mexico. And one finally worked. So in early June, the Lower Marine Riser Package, the LMRP cap, was installed. So this cap basically slowed the leak down and allowed BP to start siphoning oil out of the spill. And they started to get about like 15,000 barrels of oil per day. So I think what they were trying to do, they put this cap on, but the cap didn't really stop the spill completely. It still leaked out some oil. So then they siphoned the other gas or the other oil that was coming out, like all the extra, they siphoned off and put into barrels on like a tanker. Of course, immediately they approved upon their siphoning abilities because they're an oil company. They want to get their oil. They used a few other devices. Basically, like they had this siphoning device and they put a couple other things on there to kind of like siphon more oil out of there. So they ended up basically getting like 25,000 barrels per day while they were siphoning, but it was also preventing the like more leakage into the Gulf of Mexico because the cap that they put on there, the LMRP cap, it didn't stop all the leak. But good news. In early July, they finally had a permanent seal solution. So about 4.9 million barrels of oil was estimated to have been leaked into the Gulf of Mexico. But only about 800,000 barrels of oil was actually captured. And I'm not sure if that's like when they put that first cap on there that was leaking and they were siphoning, or like they were just, I mean, I'm sure that's part of it, but also if they were trying to get the oil off the water. I don't know. But almost 5 million barrels of oil was estimated to have leaked into the Gulf of Mexico. Like I said, the biggest oil spill in our history. So, the cleanup was, quite the ordeal. So the oil slick extended more than 57,500 square miles. Like it's huge. And in order to clean this up, 1.8 million gallons of dispersants were pumped directly into the leak and applied aerially to the slick. Dispersants, if you don't know, are a substance that basically emulsifies the oil and allows it to metabolize way faster. That way it can, go away. Otherwise, you're just like waiting for the ocean to get rid of the oil like it would. But the ocean can't get rid of this much oil. Some of the slick was basically like corralled, and they either siphoned it or they burned the oil in those areas. They could corral some of it with like booms is what they called them. And they could they burned off a lot of that oil, but also it's just a nasty process. Any kind of way you're trying to clean up oil, it's just a nasty process. And the oil was manually removed from the beaches of Louisiana. And then you also have like the marshlands and the swamps in different areas. I mean, it's pretty wet in those areas, and in a lot of the areas of like you got Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, lots of marshes, swamps, stuff like that. So that was a little bit trickier because you have a lot of foliage in those areas. So the cleanup there was more unique. Is I don't know how to explain it any other way. Okay, so let's get into the conspiracies behind this because that's what we do, right? So the first theory, I mean, they kind of all go together, is that extreme environmentalists blew up the rig. So Rush Limbaugh famously suggested that, quote, hardcore environmental wackos, unquote, blew up the oil rig because they wanted to, quote, head off more oil drilling, unquote, and basically stop Congress from passing an energy bill that would allow for more drilling. The bill that's being talked about here was called Cap and Trade. Basically, the bill called for like reduced carbon dioxide emissions, and apparently environmental extremists opposed the bill, which was going to help with the environment. But they opposed the bill because they thought it would lead to basically more nuclear power plants and offshore drilling. This Cap and Trade bill was trying to cap the amount of carbon dioxide that could go into the atmosphere. That included from like factories and different places like that. They could get to a certain amount, or if they didn't use all the amount that they were allotted, they could trade. Basically, they would get like a permit or like I don't know, almost like emissions money. And if they didn't use all their emissions money, they could trade it they could actually get real money back in return. Or if they needed more, they could, trade it. They could buy more emissions money from other companies. They couldn't buy more. There was going to be enough money to go around. I don't know what else to call it, but like emissions money. And that was going to be how they controlled the emissions, right? Well, The real extremists, the real environmental extremists were like, well, that means that nuclear power plants and offshore drilling is gonna become more prominent. And Rush Limbaugh's kind of theory here is that like they were trying to stop this cap and trade bill, and the cap and trade bill didn't pass at the time, not that I could find. It's been talked about many times, but at this point, I couldn't find it.
Did you know that over 40% of Americans have a hard time swallowing pills? So when it's time to take your vitamins, large capsules and pills are out of the question. We know that gummy vitamins exist, but they're full of sugar, they get stuck in your teeth, and they only contain a fraction of the nutrients you need. Luckily, Easy Melts has discovered the ultimate vitamin sweet spot. Vitamins that melt in your mouth, taste like a treat, and are packed with nutrients ready for absorption, all without an ounce of sugar. For a limited time, Easy Melts is giving listeners a free 3-month supply of vitamin D3 with their first purchase. To claim your free D3 vitamins, visit try.easymelts.com/spring24. That's melts.com/spring24. Say goodbye to the old way of taking your vitamins and say hello to the easy way. Menopausal and perimenopausal women, listen up. It's time to take control of your health and comfort, and Winona is here to help. Winona is a telemedicine company for menopause care who believes that your symptoms are real, important, and deserve to be taken seriously. And for many women, this starts with hormone replacement therapy. Winona's HRT is made with plant-based, bioidentical hormones rather than synthetic ones, so it better aligns with your body to offer relief from hot flashes, weight gain, and other uncomfortable symptoms. 80% of women who use Winona find relief within just 90 days. So, what are you waiting for? Get started today. Visit buywinona.com today to start your free visit. With free shipping and the ability to pause or cancel at any time, your path to wellness has zero obligations. Use code SPRING24 at buywinona.com for 25% off your first treatment plan. That's BYWINONA.com for 25% off. Winona. Menopause care made easy.
Anyway, they did send the SWAT teams down to the Gulf of Mexico to inspect the rigs, which does seem a little bit fishy. Get it? I was being punny because it's an offshore drilling rig. Anyway, it is a little bit fishy because, like, why would you send a SWAT team down to an oil rig explosion unless there was, like, suspicious characters in the area, basically? I don't know. Rahm Emanuel said a disaster is a terrible thing to waste. That's paraphrased. But the environmentalists sure did use the oil spill as a rallying cry after the fact. So almost immediately afterwards, the director of Environment Texas had the canvassers switch from fundraising for like a remote mountain range to urging people to sign a petition to end offshore drilling. Just stop it. And then President Obama declared a 6-month moratorium on deepwater drilling. They could still do shallow water drilling, but not deep water drilling. They stopped all that. And because of the spill, environmental issues were put straight into the spotlight, and this gave the environmentalists the fuel they needed. And it's not like a far stretch to say like a couple extremists helped to blow up the rig. I mean, it's not a far stretch to say anybody blew something up around here. And I'm not trying to like get into whatever politics, nothing. It's just a thing that people do, is blow things up, especially to get their way. I mean, they could just be domestic terrorists. So, okay, earlier I mentioned Halliburton. And this was the Oil Field Services Corporation that had been hired to put in the concrete core, which is the same concrete core that failed on the rig. And I actually found that the same concrete core had failed in 2008 on a completely different rig. I think also owned by BP. I can't remember exactly because I didn't write it down. My apologies, friends. But I do know that in 2008, September, I remember this. In September of 2008, the same core failed on a different rig. I thought that was really, really odd. Well, turns out that right before, like a week before this rig exploded, and the concrete core that was installed was fresh, like brand new. Halliburton had just been out there. And the week before, Halliburton had actually acquired a company that suppresses oil well fires and blowouts. So if if Halliburton was involved, and this is just kind of like me speculating here, you know how I like to do that. If they were involved, maybe they were thinking, oh, this will only cause like a little bit of a fire on this oil rig, and then our new company that we just acquired can go out there and put out the fire, and it's like a win-win, because then we get more business, more money. So we put in this concrete core, it failed, caused a fire. We'll put out the fire too, put in a new concrete core. I don't know, like this is just again me speculating. However, BP in the end, it did end up suing Halliburton for $1.1 billion over this oil spill for unspecified damages. And if Halliburton was trying to make money on this deal, they did not go about it doing it right. Like they did a terrible job. That's all I'm saying. They were not very good. I also found somewhere, and I couldn't really find any more information about this, but I wanted to mention it to you guys because I found it in my research. So, dumping of BP stocks in the days and weeks leading up to the disaster was happening all over the board. So, this is suggesting that maybe people knew or had some knowledge that something might happen. And I don't know for sure. Like I said, I couldn't really find any more claims about this. This was just like a small little snippet of a small article somewhere, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Tried to look up more information, and I couldn't find anything for you guys. But it was suggested that the stocks were kind of being like dumped leading up to this, and then there was the explosion. So maybe somebody knew. They're like, let's sell high, right? It's a stock market. Sell high. Of course, you've always got the conspiracy theory that the government was involved somehow. So Robert Rutherford, who ran a website called patriotspace.com, shot videos and filed reports of the Army and Coast Guard in full battle dress and contractors in white helmets, and he was suggesting that the government was basically up to no good. Robert Rutherford ran this website. I tried to find the website, no longer exists. I tried to find the guy. I couldn't find him. There's too many Robert Rutherfords, which is like, I think a weird name, but no, like there's a bunch of them. And I mean, there's a doctor in my area named this. So he's not my immediate area. He's just in the state, I think. But he popped up first. I was like, I'm not looking for a doctor. I'm looking for a conspiracy theorist here. You think that my machine would know that by now. It doesn't. Also, if I ever get raided, they're going to be like, what kind of weird information are you trying to find on the internet? I'm definitely on some watch list somewhere. So, all I want to say is the government ever up to any good ever, right? If the government's involved. Although, this theory may be able to be explained away because the U.S. Coast Guard and the Environmental Protection Agency were called in to help coordinate cleanup efforts. And so the Coast Guard being there honestly doesn't surprise me much. And the Army's probably in the area because they have bases in those areas as well. The Coast Guard's supposed to, watch our coasts, and the Army's probably in the area, or probably, maybe it wasn't the Army, maybe it was the National Guard, like the Louisiana National Guard. It's kind of what I'm thinking. I don't know. Like I said, I couldn't find all this information from Robert Rutherford himself. So it's just I'm going off of other places where people said he said these things. But these are just kind of like my thoughts with the Coast Guard and the Army being there. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm all for good government cover-up. They're always covering stuff up. But in this case, they might have just been there to, like, help clean up and help prevent future spillage or like stop the spillage or whatever BP needed, basically like kind of assist. So the aftermath of this event was, it's pretty drastic. Of course, it is the largest oil spill in our history, so we have to understand that it's going to be drastic. But the moratorium that was put into place left somewhere between 8 and 12,000 people temporarily unemployed. Because remember, this moratorium that was put in place basically said no deep water drilling for 6 months. And so all these people that their whole livelihood is revolving around this, how many people, especially in that area, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, that area down there where they're drilling, that's such a huge industry. Well, now they can't do it anymore. So how many people were left? You have to think about the people, not just like the environmental impact is huge. And I'm not trying to take anything away from that, But these people, like, their livelihoods revolved around having this job on these these oil rigs, and then they didn't anymore for 6 months. And some of them probably had to go get other jobs, and some of them just probably suffered for 6 months. The tourism of the area was almost brought to a complete halt because people don't want to visit oil-covered beaches. So now that tourist industry, that again, all these people's livelihoods revolve around tourism, and now they're not getting any tourists. Nobody wants to go to an oil-covered beach. No, I don't want to go to beaches that have oil on them. No way. BP was forced to create a $20 billion compensation fund for those affected by the spill, which, I mean, $20 billion, that's a substantial amount of money. However, as always, lack of oversight to the fund allowed government entities to submit claims to the fund that were hugely inflated, and some of the submissions to the fund weren't even related to the spill. So leave it to the government to force a company to create a fund and then abuse the fund for their own personal gains. You know what I'm saying? All these people that lost their jobs, all these tourist towns that don't have tourism now, they could have used that $20 billion. But instead, the government was abusing the fund. They're like, here, BP, you need to create this fund so that way we could basically just take your money. Anyway, and of course, Hollywood got their share of the disaster when they made the movie called Deepwater Horizon. I mentioned at the beginning of the show. So don't get me wrong, I really did enjoy the movie. I'm just saying, everyone likes to get their share out of a good tragedy, you know? So that's basically Deepwater Horizon. The biggest conspiracy theories, I mean, I guess there's two. There's the environmentalists that blew up the rig, or there's the Halliburton thing. But I feel like if Halliburton was involved, like I said earlier, man, they did not do a good job. They're terrible at creating disasters to clean up disasters. It's just I don't know, maybe they've gotten better. Maybe it was them, and that was their first try, and they're like, oh man, we created a huge oil spill. I don't know. But as always, my friends, please rate and review the podcast. I'm sure you've noticed that there's ads now. I know you hate them. I know. I'm going to create an option to where you can subscribe so you don't have to get any of the ads. But this is how I can, generate a little bit of revenue so I can keep doing this for you. So I appreciate the support. I do. I love it. I appreciate all of you listening to the podcast every single week. If you share the podcast out on your social medias, I'm going to send you a free t-shirt. I have them here. I want to send them to you. I'm thinking about making some new t-shirts. We're coming into winter, so maybe I'll make a couple sweatshirts. Who doesn't love a really good sweater? Sweatshirt, t-shirt. Who knows? There's going to be lots of things coming your way. So you just hang tight and I will provide for you. Anyway, I love you guys. Stay skeptical, and I will see you next week. The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Dani Mercy. We thrive on listeners like you. If you like what you're hearing, please leave us a rating or review wherever you are listening. Follow us on Instagram at rabbit.holepodcast. Special thank you to Zakar Valaha Music for our intro.